A young woman headed home after a 4th of July party, but she never made it there. From the very first hours of the investigation, detectives began uncovering a series of troubling and downright bizarre clues. But none of them could have imagined the kind of horror they were about to face. And when the full truth finally came out, this case would go down as one of the most chilling in California's history.
There was blood on the seat, blood on the gear shift, blood on the steering wheel. But outside the car, on the pavement, there was nothing. Not one drop. And that single detail told investigators something no one wanted to believe. Megan Barroso never got out of that car on her own. Welcome to Cairo True Crime Breakdown. Megan grew up splitting time between her separated parents, finding her passion in dance as a kid. A rough patch came in high school when her mother lost her job, and the family relocated hours away, pulling Megan from her school and friends right when she needed them most. The moment she graduated, she moved back toward home, settled into her own apartment, enrolled in community college, and took a job in the purchasing department of a clothing manufacturer, building her life back around the people and places she'd missed. On July 4, 2001, Megan was 20 years old, spending the day with friends, a barbecue, then a beach party a town over to watch the fireworks. After a hug goodbye at nearly 2 in the morning, a brief mix-up with a friend's phone turned her back toward the house one last time before she finally hit the road for home. It was the last ordinary moment before she vanished for good. Around 4 in the morning, a security guard patrolling a nearby stretch of road heard what he assumed were leftover holiday fireworks. He went to check it out and found a car sitting partly on the median, engine still running, driver's door open, headlights and wipers both on. No driver in sight. His first instinct was that some drunk holiday reveler had crashed and fled. Then he spotted a woman's sandal on the asphalt, and its match tucked under the driver's seat. Something about that didn't sit right. He stepped closer, looked inside, and saw the blood. Officers arrived to find 5 bullet holes riddled across the windshield. The driver's side window shattered completely. Blood covered the seat, the gear shift, the steering wheel. Clear signs that whoever had been sitting there had been hit, but there wasn't a trace of blood on the ground outside the car. If she'd climbed out under her own power, there would have been drops leading away. There were none. That absence became the single most important piece of evidence in the entire case. It meant someone else had taken her. What investigators didn't know yet was that the man responsible was already living just a few miles away, and it would take a completely unrelated crime to finally expose him. The driver's side of the car bore deep scrape marks, like it had been sideswiped. Investigators found her purse on the seat, smeared with blood, empty of any ID. Underneath the seat, they found her phone, also stained. Outside, they recovered shell casings, and ballistics quickly traced them to a very specific weapon, an AK-47 assault rifle, not the kind of gun most people have lying around. Piecing together the physical evidence and a data recorder built into the rental car, investigators reconstructed the attack almost minute by minute. Someone had rammed her car from the side. She hit the gas to escape. The attacker got ahead of her and waited. When she reached a red light, he opened fire. The first rounds missed. She sped forward again. But as she passed him, one shot struck her, and she lost control almost instantly, veering onto the median. The blood pattern suggested she'd reached for her phone in her purse before the attacker approached the car and took her. If you're new to this channel, this is exactly the kind of case we dig into every week. Hit subscribe now so you don't miss how this one unravels. The case exploded across local news. Fear spread fast. Someone out there had ambushed a young woman with a military-grade weapon on an ordinary street. Police set up roadblocks hoping to find anyone who'd driven past that morning. But the people who remembered seeing the abandoned car had assumed it was just a drunk driving accident, so nobody had called it in. A tip line lit up with hundreds of calls, nearly all of them dead ends. One caller claimed to have seen a man loading a body into a burgundy sedan near a stretch of mountains with a grim reputation. Officers searched the area and released details to the public. Nothing came of it. As the days dragged on, detectives leaned on Megan's friends and family, hoping someone had crossed paths with a stranger who wanted to hurt her. Everyone said the same thing. She had no enemies, no messy relationships, nothing that hinted at danger. Search dogs picked up her scent for only a few yards before it vanished entirely. Investigators chased every angle, a reward, a tip line, forensic analysis of her paperwork, and still came up empty. What none of them realized yet was that this wasn't the first time a masked man like this had struck. Somewhere else entirely, another investigation was already circling the same man. A criminal profiler brought onto the case took one look at the pattern and came to a very different conclusion than detectives had reached. Where police leaned toward a road rage attack that had spiraled out of control, the profiler was convinced this was sexual in motive and that it wasn't the attacker's first time. She pointed to two earlier, eerily similar cases. 2 years prior, a woman had been assaulted in her own bed by a masked man posing as a police officer, who forced her into her own car and drove her to a park, where he assaulted her. Then, just days before Megan disappeared, a 22-year-old woman was abducted off the street by a man in black. He blindfolded her and took her to another location, where the assault continued. She survived and gave police a detailed description. No arrest ever followed. The profiler believed all of it was connected, Megan's case included. But without a name, a face, or a single solid lead, that theory went nowhere. Then, an unrelated burglary complaint changed everything. On July 26th, a man reported his neighbor had broken into his house. Police arrested the neighbor, a 31-year-old man living with 2 roommates, one of whom owned an AK-47. At the time, the arresting officers had no idea a rifle like that was tied to an open kidnapping case just towns away. From jail, the suspect called one of his roommates and asked him to get rid of a bag he'd stashed in a dumpster. The roommate, assuming it held stolen property, retrieved it and found videotapes instead. Curiosity got the better of him. What he saw on those tapes was women, restrained, with a masked man clearly at the center of it. He recognized the voice immediately. Some of the footage had been filmed inside their own shared house. Alongside the tapes were pairs of women's underwear and photographs of women in explicit poses, including, to his shock, his roommate's own girlfriend of 3 years. He called the police. This is the twist that still gives us chills every time we cover a case like this. If you want more stories where the break comes from somewhere nobody expected, drop a comment and let us know. What started as a simple burglary case cracked open into something far larger. A suspected serial predator whose identity had eluded investigators for years. The profiler had already been tracking this same offender across more than 10 cases, and she recognized several of the victims from the tapes instantly, even with his face hidden behind a mask. Detectives connected the dots to that second earlier assault, the young woman who'd survived and given a full description. She was brought in for a lineup. Without hesitation, she identified the man in custody. That alone was enough to bury him under a serious sentence. But the investigators still needed to know if Megan's case belonged to him too. His access to an AK-47 through his roommate was the first thread. Then came the detail that sealed it. The rifle used in that household was missing its cleaning rod, a small metal piece that fits under the barrel. A matching rod had been recovered near Megan's abandoned car. It was the same piece of evidence that had already helped confirm her vehicle had been struck by AK-47 rounds. With a roommate's consent, investigators searched the suspect's room again. Tucked on the floor, overlooked before, was a woman's jacket, matching the one Megan had been wearing the night she vanished. A rushed warrant sent it straight to the lab. While waiting on results, detectives pieced together his movements on July 4th. He'd spent the evening drinking with a roommate after a small gathering. then bedded down on the living room floor once the guests left. But when that roommate woke in the middle of the night, the suspect was gone. Hours later, gone again, until his roommate glanced out the window and found him scrubbing down his pickup truck at 4 in the morning. By the time the household woke for the day, he was still out there, cleaning a vehicle that, by the time anyone thought to question it, looked suspiciously spotless. DNA and forensic evidence ultimately tied him directly to Megan's abduction and murder. Her body was recovered weeks after she vanished, in a ravine consistent with the case's darkest theory, that she'd been shot and abducted, and that she didn't survive the encounter. The man responsible, already known to investigators as the suspect behind a string of unsolved assaults across the region, was charged with first-degree murder, while separately facing more than a dozen other charges tied to his other victims. In 2003, he was convicted and sentenced to death. California's later moratorium on executions means he is serving that sentence out in prison for the rest of his life, rather than facing execution. What still lingers about this case isn't the mystery of who did it. That question was answered. It's how close the truth came to staying buried. If one neighbor hadn't reported a burglary, if one roommate hadn't opened that bag out of curiosity instead of just tossing it, if a profiler hadn't been quietly connecting cases no one else had linked, the truth might never have surfaced at all. A young woman who spent her last night doing something as ordinary as watching fireworks with her friends became the case that finally exposed a man who had been hurting people for years, hiding in plain sight among his own roommates and neighbors. If you want to see justice followed all the way through on cases like this, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications so you never miss one. This is what true crime documentary storytelling should feel like. Cases where the truth was closer than anyone realized. So we'll leave you with this. How many other cases are sitting one accidental discovery away from finally being solved?